All right. Hello and welcome to Choose a Fi. Today on the show, we have a longtime friend and multi-time guest on the podcast, Diania Merriam. She's the founder of the Economy Conference, which is really a weekend of fun and learning for the Fi community. And I'm excited to talk about an upcoming conference, which should be fun in 2023. And she's also the host of the Optimal Finance Daily podcast. And it's interesting when you read a piece of content from a friend of yours that just completely blows you away. And actually, Diania did that essentially on 2 successive weeks with 2 of her email newsletters. And the first was her resignation letter. And I read this and my blood was boiling at the situation that she had to endure. And then the following week was the lessons she's learned. And I said to her before we hit record that she could just read this email and it would be the best episode of Choose a Vi that we've done in 2 years because it was that powerful. It's everything that you expect to get out of the power of Fi encapsulated in one story. And I'm just so excited to bring it to the audience today. So with that, welcome to Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Diania, welcome back to Choose a Fi. So happy to see you and happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, this should be really great. So obviously, I do want to talk about economy, but let's put that at the end because I think we have more pressing issues here. So like I said in the intro, your resignation letter, it hit me on such a level that I can't even describe. And obviously, I said there was a toxic work environment, but part of that was due to the fact that you are female. And as the father of 2 daughters who are really just incredibly bright and have the world ahead of them, like just the fact that this is still going on in 2022 just made my blood boil. So I had to have you on just to talk about that. But then your follow-up email was just truly remarkable. It was a tour de force of why we're doing this, right? Like why I've spent the last 6 years doing Choose a Fi and why we talk about the power of Fi, right, Diania?
Well, I so appreciate that, Brad. And, it's interesting because I'm going on almost 2 years now. This was January of 2021 that I quit my job. And I had been on your show since then. And I've done a lot of interviews since then about quitting my job. And I've really danced around the reason why. When people would ask me, why did you quit your job before reaching Fi? I would say things like, well, it became clear that my employer no longer valued me, which is true. Right? But it's not the whole truth. And so, I think as time has gone on and I have further processed this situation and come to terms with the reality of what happened, I think I feel more in a position to talk about it, but it is a really hard conversation to have. And so that's why I really appreciate you kind of giving the time and space for us to dig into it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on and talking about it because I think it really is important. And this is not something that we've really talked about here on the podcast, certainly. And like you said, it's something that for whatever reason is still difficult to talk about. And I don't think it should be. I think people of good faith can learn and have conversations and understand that things have existed for decades and it doesn't have to always be that way.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting, as you said, my employer didn't value me. That's the understatement of the century. But let's get into it. So, for the vast majority of the audience who did not read your email, I'd love to hear in your words the story.
Sure. So to give you some context, I was with my employer for 9 years. And over that time, I had a great career and I was really focused on increasing my income. I mean, I had like 20 to 25% raises 3 years in a row. I was one of their top performers on the sales team. I got permission to take a 2-month sabbatical to go to Spain and walk the Camino, which for those who don't know is a 500-mile trek across Spain. Like for many, many years, I felt like I was a truly valued employee. And so I would put myself in that camp of people who say, well, why pursue FI? I like my job, right? People who think that financial independence is about just like quitting work. It can be very confusing. Like, why do I want to retire? Why do I want to quit my job when I'm enjoying my job? I would put myself in that camp. I had colleagues that I would consider very close friends that felt like family to me. And I was really proud of the work that I was doing, right? So what was kind of going on in the background of this 9 years is I had started working for a female-owned, founded, and led organization. We had about 5 offices around the world that were all led by women. And for most of my career, I had worked for women. But what happened was probably about halfway through my time there, the company was acquired by a big like $24 billion conglomerate, Chinese conglomerate. And over time, we were joint ventured and we were spun off, and leadership had been changing during this time. And it very slowly turned into a boys' club, which honestly didn't really feel like it affected me that much, right? I noticed that women in leadership positions were leaving the company, but I just thought that was the natural progression of a changing company over time. It didn't really hit me as anything concerning until about my last year there. I had a new boss, which has happened a number of times over my career. Pretty typical thing to happen when, you're with a company for a long time. Now, this new boss was hired to be a senior salesperson on our team. He was a friend of the CEO, and he was hired to like show us how to do those multi-million-dollar deals, right? He never did one deal. And then he was promoted to chief revenue officer, and he became my boss. Now, I watched this dynamic and Again, gender never like entered the equation for me. I looked at it and said, well, that's very clearly nepotism. And it was concerning, but it was like, well, what am I going to do about it? Right? He was my boss who, clearly didn't have the experience and skill set that my previous bosses had, but he was a manager. And so I figured, what's the harm? But over the course of that year, he very openly dismissed my value and unapologetically dismissed my value. And I'll tell you, like the red flag from day one, looking back on it, I didn't really notice it at the time, but our first meeting as like a get to know each other as my manager, he canceled it 10 times and rescheduled it. Which in my mind, it was like, oh, well, you clearly can't like manage your calendar. And like you have an assistant. Like, why is this so hard to schedule? Right? Or he just like wouldn't show up and say he forgot. And at the time, I didn't think this had anything to do with me. I just thought that he was incompetent with his own calendar.
Right.
Right. And so I didn't take it personally, but I did notice he didn't do it to anyone else. And so I called him out on it. And I said, I find this really disrespectful that you're disrespecting my time in this way. And we kind of had a chat about it and he apologized. And I thought we were kind of over that. Now, mind you, while this kind of dynamic is happening, again, all of the women that had been leading this organization in leadership positions and even just in other departments had been slowly leaving the company. And so I found myself as the only woman on my team, one of the highest performers, and I knew I was the lowest paid. And so when kind of Black Lives Matter was becoming like very prominent in the press and Me Too movement, like all that kind of stuff was going on. And I think a lot of corporations created these very performative diversity and inclusion initiatives. And so I find myself being pulled into all of these meetings about diversity and inclusion. And I'm being asked, like, Diana, as the only woman on the team, what do you think about diversity and inclusion? And I would say things like, well, I think what we're really talking about is equality. And if you want to do something about a diversity and inclusion, I think the thing you should address is pay parity. And so that's kind of my response to it all. And I had realized, and this is my own fault, But, I had mentioned that I had those 20 to 25% raises 3 years in a row, and I had been given permission to take a 2-month sabbatical. That sabbatical was unpaid, by the way. And I also got permission to move to Cincinnati in 2017 and work remotely before it was the norm. And so I had felt like the company had really given me a lot of privileges for being a high performer, but that doesn't mean that I never signed up to get a raise again.
Right.
And because I was so grossly underpaid, even those 20 to 25% raises wasn't getting me into a comparable range of my peers. And so I saw this as an opportunity to rectify that. And I hadn't had a raise by that point in 3 years. And it was because I didn't really ask for one. I felt at that time that I had gotten, such amazing treatment back up till 2017 that I just felt like it was almost like I didn't think I was in a position to ask for more, and time slipped by. 3 years slipped by and I didn't ask for a raise. So I found this as an opportunity to rectify that. And so I bring to my manager's attention that I know I'm one of the highest performers and yet I'm the lowest paid. And I made my case like I'm a salesperson. So the numbers, it's very easy to quantify the numbers. And I had showed him that over the course of my career, I made my clients $55 million. I made the company millions of dollars in commissions. I was a valuable employee. He hadn't done one deal for the company. I had done over 80 deals for the company. And so, I bring this to his attention and he says, okay, well, we're going to do a market analysis on your market value, right? And I said, great, I'm going to do the same. Because I knew that I worked in such a niche industry that it's really hard to quantify my market value. It's not like you can go on salary.com and easily figure it out. But I've been well connected in this industry for over a decade. And so I went to our top 6 competitors. And I just went to my contacts at our top competitors. I said, look, I'm not asking for a job, but I haven't applied for a job in 9 years. I don't even know how much I'm worth. I just know that I'm the lowest paid on my team. And so can you help me understand, based on my experience, my results, my qualifications, if you were going to hire me today, how much would you pay me? And I wouldn't answer any questions about my current salary level, right? Because that to me was irrelevant. I don't want to get a 10% bump from where I'm at. I want to understand my market value. And so the responses that I got on average were all 50 grand more than what I was making. So I bring that to my manager at the time. And what he says to me is that they did a market analysis, HR did, and they actually think that I'm overpaid.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Then he said that I cannot point to all of my previous contributions to the company because I have already been compensated for that work. So that was the second reason he said that I wouldn't get a raise. And then the third reason was that they were only going to judge me. And this was in 2020, that kind of fiscal year's performance. They're only going to judge me on that single year's performance to determine if I was eligible for a raise. And I did not knock it out of the park that year. Well, the entire time he has been my manager, he has not set any expectations for performance, which again is really easy for a salesperson. Give me a number to hit, right? He would not do that the entire time that I was working for him. And so when I said to him, well, what would knocking out of the park look like? Or what would even meeting expectations look like? He would not give me a firm answer. So I just felt like I was being set up to fail. To tell me that I'm not meeting expectations or exceeding expectations, but then refuse to clarify what those expectations are. It's like the bare bones job of a manager. So it felt like something is up here. I understand that he's an incompetent manager, but it felt like something more. And so I started to do my own digging, okay, if you're not going to tell me what the expectations are, let me look at my peers, because I had just had a male colleague who was promoted to VP. And so I went and looked at what his numbers were. And depending on how you slice it, whether you look at total revenue or commissions to the company, either we had the exact same sales level or I was bringing in more because I had a higher commission level on my sales. And so it just became very obvious that something else was up here. And it was really hard for me to kind of call it discrimination, because in my world, the idea that I could be somehow disadvantaged or looked at differently from my gender. I know this is naive to say because we understand on a grand scale that this is the reality and women talk about this all the time. But the idea that I could be disadvantaged for being a woman, it was just ludicrous to me. I just saw it as nepotism, right? That they're all friends and that's why I didn't get the promotion or didn't get the raise. And so I decided on principle that I needed to leave. And as I was going through this decision-making process, it took me about a month to evaluate my options, look at my financial situation, consult with my support network. And during that process, I had gone to 10 women that I had worked with, 5 of which who had left before me, 5 of which who were still there. I was completely transparent about this situation. And they are who convinced me that it was discrimination because they all were dealing or had dealt with a similar situation. And so the letter that you referenced in your opening, I look at that letter as it's not just my letter, it is our letter. Because even though it was using my specific situation, all 10 of those women had reviewed that letter and given me their input. And I felt like I was submitting it on our behalf.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. So, I mean, just the last thing you said, it's not just my letter, it's our letter. That's one of those chills-inducing moments for sure. Yeah, this is, God, I'm sitting here with just so many emotions, so many responses, but it just, like you said, it seemed ludicrous to you that this could be because you're a woman. I mean, you're not sitting here looking for it. You're not searching out for, I'm being discriminated against. In fact, it sounds like the polar opposite. That didn't even come to your mind because that was so far-fetched.
I didn't want to believe it because it's just such a demoralizing, disempowering position to recognize you're being treated for a reason that's beyond your control. And also, as someone who was raised by a breadwinning woman, in school, I was a straight A student that went to college on a full academic scholarship. All the best students were always girls. I was surrounded by girls in school. I had always worked for female entrepreneurs or women managers. This idea that I was, again, somehow disadvantaged or not as good as a man just because of my gender, it just felt ludicrous to me. And I didn't want to believe that that was the reason. Again, I wanted to believe that it was more nepotism. I think it's probably a combination of both of those things. And I really don't think that anyone sat around the table and said, let's not promote Diana or give her the raise that she thinks she deserves because she's a woman. I don't think that it's that blatant. I think it's so subtle and under the radar that when I wrote my exit letter, granted, I didn't get a response from my manager or the CEO. I got a response from the head of HR of our parent company, who is a woman. And what she said in her response was, we're going to have an internal investigation, right? That obviously didn't go anywhere. And I can understand why you would leave for this reason. It almost felt like she was admitting guilt in some way, that she recognizes that this is an issue at the company. But I think when they read that letter, they were probably surprised that I was calling out discrimination, because I don't think that anyone that is behaving this way is fully aware of it. I think it's almost like an unconscious bias that they just don't even recognize.
And that's what I want to dial in on, because I think we hear these stats, right? You hear the stats of there being a pay gap or a wage gap. And it's hard to wrap your mind around how that actually occurs. Because again, I see the stats, so I know that's real, but I can't, in 2022, I can't envision, and this is probably hopelessly naive and stupid on my part, but literally sitting down and saying, okay, this person is a woman, I'm going to pay her 20% less for the exact same job. That, it just seems hard to imagine. But that said, I'm sure it does happen occasionally, right?
Well, I think it probably does happen, but I think that's probably extremely rare. I think what happens is, she didn't ask for it, so why should I pay her more? And there's reasons why she doesn't ask for it, right? Because she doesn't know how to advocate for herself. And it's ingrained that we don't want to rock the boat and we don't want to burn bridges. And we're afraid to, because again, I think the dynamic with women is that we lack a lot of confidence in these kind of conversations. And then when we do exhibit the kind of confidence that I think I did when I asked for a raise, it's seen as aggressive. Now you're a troublemaker, right? And this is all related to kind of social norms about what we believe gender roles are. And it's so, again, subtle and unconscious that I don't think anyone is saying, well, she's a woman, so I'm going to pay her 20% less. I think and I'll give you an example of I think that we're all participating in these kind of very subtle beliefs about women, and we don't even realize that we're doing it because they're so ingrained in us. So for example, and I'm like really embarrassed to tell you this, but I want to admit that like for most of my life, even though I, again, had a mother who was a breadwinner and worked for really strong women, and obviously I'm a woman, I think women are amazing, yet even me, I can remember instances of going into a meeting during my corporate career, and if there was a young, beautiful woman with an older gentleman that was her boss, right? I would assume she got that job because she was attractive. Like, it's horrible to admit that, but I have to be honest about some of these beliefs that are ingrained in us, that I needed her to prove to me that she was intelligent enough to have that job. That is horrible, but it's a legitimate thing that I believed, during my corporate career. And I think a lot of this stems from our societal norms that really truly believe that the value of a woman is in her appearance. It's in her nurturing abilities. We're overly sexualized, right? And so when that is where her true value lies in the mind of society, it's very easy to discount her intelligence and her sense of humor, her kindness, all of the things that can make you really good in the business world. It's really easy to discount that in a woman if you believe her main value is her appearance. And we get messages every single day from our society to reinforce that norm. And until I was able to kind of really see that firsthand, I would say in the recent months, that's really come to light for me, where I recognize, some people would call this misogyny, which I know misogyny is kind of like a hard word. It was a hard word for me too, because I think a lot of people define it as the hatred of women. But I think it could be seen as the devaluing of women, or the not seeing where the true value of a woman lies and misplacing that. And so when you look at it that way, it's like, wow, it makes a lot of sense for all discrimination to flow out of this social norm, because I'm not going to be seen as valuable for my contributions and my intellect and what I brought to that team. And it's so subtle that I think oftentimes it goes way under the radar. So I'll give you another example that shows the subtlety of this and how I had participated in the past. So I was on a podcast interview with a man that I would now probably define as misogynistic, though he didn't realize it. And I'm not blaming and saying he's a horrible person. I think it was a very unconscious thing for him. And so he's interviewing me about the FIRE movement. Now, I wouldn't claim to be like the most knowledgeable person about the FIRE movement, right? The FIRE movement is a very broad, dynamic thing, but I have opinions about it and I'm pretty well ingrained in it. And this person didn't know that much about the FIRE movement. So the interview was for me to share my knowledge. And what was happening during the interview is that he was continually cutting me off. He was continually presenting his uninformed opinion as more valuable as my more informed, or some would say expert opinion. And so it was rubbing me the wrong way, like the whole interview. And I couldn't quite place my finger on why, because it was so subtle in some ways. And then at the end of the interview, he says, well, I got to let everyone know, if that isn't watching the video of this, she's just got such a beautiful smile. And it was this kind of like patronizing pat on the head at the end and this was the part where he was summarizing all of the points that I was trying to make during this interview. And really, what are the key takeaways for his audience? And the key takeaway is that I've got a nice smile. Like, it was a really demoralizing thing. And I think in my mind, and a lot of people listening to this, probably, what's the big deal? He gave you a compliment, right? Like, he gave you a compliment. Just be thankful that he gave you a compliment. But it's not just a compliment. It is valuing my appearance over the knowledge and my intellect that I just shared with you for an hour. There is a distinction there. And I put a newsletter about this out, and I had a friend who's a podcaster write me, and he said, well, I want to make sure I'm not doing this. Like, when is it okay to give a woman a compliment? And I said, look, I love compliments. Shower me with compliments. Like, I'm a real sucker for them, right? Like, I'm not saying never compliment a woman. I'm not saying don't appreciate the way a woman looks. That is part of what's so great about women. We're beautiful, right? However, it's not the most interesting thing about her. On the scale of things that are great about women, the physical beauty is at the bottom of the list. And that's kind of where I said in that newsletter that my appearance, I think, is the least interesting thing about me. And so don't focus on that. I'm not saying don't notice it, but don't focus it as my most valuable thing I bring to the table.
Sure. And in a summary, after, like you said, you just talked for an hour about the FI movement and showed your level of expertise. To me, the word that comes to mind is it almost like nullified that. Like it was just so needless and extraneous, right? Like, why is it relevant what your smile is? In a summary of what you just talked about, yeah, it just seems peculiar. And I think, like you're saying, so much of this is subtle, and I think that's what makes it so insidious, because we A, might not see it, and B, even when you see it, it's hard to understand where it comes from, which is where, like, when you're talking about this organization, I kind of want to go back to that, like the shift from this female owned and led organization into this, they was purchased by this conglomerate and things started changing. But it speaks to corporate culture and just cultures in general of organizations, and like to the point where this head HR person almost tacitly admitted, okay, we do have a problem. It was your interpretation of it, and seems like a very legitimate interpretation, certainly. How the heck, Diana, how does that happen? Like, I can't imagine a world where somebody came in and said, okay, it's a boys club, we're taking over. Like, but how does it happen?
Kind of like you said, it's not that blatant. I think that these culture shifts happen slowly over time. And I think, again, it's this subtle misogyny that we're just not aware of. And I'm guilty of it too. Like I mentioned, being in a meeting and assuming that a woman got her job because of her appearance. It's horrible to like admit that. But that's what I was really thinking at the time. And I think the way that this happens and the way this persists is in the silence. It's because we're not acknowledging it. And I think that's why it continues to manifest itself. And so I think even just us having this conversation and me being willing to share that letter and me being willing to speak out about it, as uncomfortable it has made me over the last couple of years, I think this is how we start to change, because the way this happens is through societal norms that have been around for hundreds of years. And you know what? Who cares how it happened? We recognize that it's happening now and that it's wrong. And so I think by building awareness around it and building awareness on how we all unknowingly participate in it. And even in that recent podcast interview, I participated in it because I thanked him for complimenting my smile. And I know it's uncomfortable, like to just be like, hey, that's kind of like inappropriate, right? Or, to like call him out on a podcast interview. This is someone I don't know very well. Like, I feel like that could have been really confrontational. And I'm still trying to figure out a way that like we can address this stuff with a sense of curiosity and compassion rather than that like angry feminist that's like, don't talk to me that way. And then that just creates a defensiveness where there's no communication now because walls are just going up on both sides. So I don't have like all of the answers on how we can like address it in the most productive way. But I do think that talking about it and building awareness around it and building up a willingness to not tolerate it while it's happening, I think on both sides, when men see it happening, when women see it happening, I think that is where we're going to start seeing some big shifts. And that kind of leads me to, deciding to quit and walk away from an organization that was treating women this way. I think I want to see a lot more of that because this community, the FI community, is an incredible financial position to actually enact change, right? And so I consider myself an extremely privileged woman, right? I'm a white woman who was raised in a first world country. I'm educated, I was making a 6-figure salary. I'm in an incredible position to take on a big risk and to leave my income and leave my employment and say something about it. And I truly believe that the way that we fight this problem is not by fighting it directly. It's starving the problem. If every talented woman were to walk away from a discriminatory or toxic environment because she had the funds to be able to do so, these organizations would crumble. right? And case in point, after I left, my former employer went through a bankruptcy. Now, granted, this isn't because of me specifically, right? Like I didn't bring the whole company down by leaving. I think this was something that happened slowly over a long period of time of mismanagement. But I will say that I think that the amount of talent that walks out the door from a toxic environment definitely influences that. And so I would love to see more people in this community choose to do that, whether you're a man or a woman. Right? Be in the financial position to not have to tolerate a toxic environment if it's directed at you or directed at someone else.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. And it does get into really the beauty and the powers of FI. And it's interesting. I follow this Iranian artist on Twitter, and he's obviously talking about significant issues in his country and basically saying like the silent are the most complicit on some levels.
Yeah.
And you can't sit silently when you know better and when you can enact change, when you can make a difference, right? And I think that's what you're talking about here is like us being aware of this and then talking about it helps in general, right? It's the first step, that awareness, that curiosity. And then we, as you're saying, again, privilege is another word that is one of those triggering words, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be at all. Like, let's call a spade, right? Like you and I are both privileged in many ways. And the power that we're afforded by having significant incomes and net worth gives us options, and it gives us power to stand up against things that we don't want to see perpetuated in this world. It's very simple.
Absolutely. I mean, the World Bank had some stat that almost half of the world's population makes less than $5 a day. So I'm sorry, I am privileged. I am like, I'm in a great, and maybe privileged is a triggering word, but maybe we can acknowledge that we have significant resources to enact change, right? And we have an ability to do that in ways that other people can't. Like I remember when I was leaving and I was talking to those 5 women who were still employed by the company, and they weren't able to leave like I did because they didn't have the financial funds to do that. Even learning about my mom's, this opened up a lot of conversations with my mom about her history in being a breadwinner. And she told me when she was a young RN in the ICU, she had a doctor that would grope her. And she continually asked him to stop. And he even said to her one time, "What are you going to do about it?" And he was right. She couldn't do anything about it. She was the breadwinner of her family. She had 2 young kids at home. She could not lose that job. She was desperate for that job. And that's the kind of situations that we can find ourselves in. Those are the kind of situations that we can find ourselves in when we're not in a financial position to leave. But people like us that can leave, even if it's not as bad as that situation, right? I wasn't being groped at work. And I still made a substantial salary where I was saving 60% of my income, right? I think for a lot of people, it's like, well, these are just the realities of the world. Just cope with it because it's still a good gig for you, even though you're being unfairly treated. I think that in us making a decision to fully leverage our financial position for not just to reach financial independence, but to enact change that we want to see in the world, I think that to me is a lot more fulfilling than just trying to reach FI on my own and, handle my own financial needs.
Yeah. And what are you going to do about it is, just an abhorrent thing to say. And I mean, goodness, like you said in the second email newsletter, like I needed to stop protecting my money and start allowing my money to protect me. And I think that is beautifully put. I'd love for you to expound on that.
Yeah, it occurred to me when I was making this decision because I was really scared about the ramifications for my FI plan to like walk away from my income. And, I didn't really have a plan of like, how am I going to replace this income? How does this affect my path to FI? And what occurred to me is, a lot of us will diligently save an emergency fund in the event that our employer decides to let us go, or there's an emergency in some way, or there's a medical issue, right? Why don't we see being in a toxic environment or being mistreated in this way? Why don't we see that as an emergency? Why are we willing to tolerate that? I think I had to realize that I already have too much money to tolerate this kind of treatment. And I think most people listening to this, if you are out of debt, if you have an emergency fund, if you've even reached Coast-Fi status, you have an incredible amount of options open to you to continue to suffer until you reach 25 times your yearly expenses. It is unnecessary. And I had a number of people say to me when I announced that I had left my job before reaching FI, I would get emails like, oh, I so admire what you did. I'm 2 years away from FI and I'm so miserable at this toxic work environment. I wish I could do what you did, but I'm just going to stick it out for the next 2 years. And that to me is a great example of not fully leveraging or understanding the power you already have. Right? It's like you don't all of a sudden get options when you reach full FI. You already have options, and your choice not to exercise those options are much more of an emotional issue and I think a scarcity mindset issue than it is you having the funds to be able to take a risk.
Yeah. I mean, that is like critically and almost criminally misunderstanding the concept of FI. To be 2 years from FI, but detesting your situation, right? And not doing something about it just to reach this Shangri-La of some number, right? Like, which is preposterous and dripping with sarcasm. And you mentioned Coast-Fi. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that because I think that's where you were. But I mean, right, this person clearly, like I like to say, we get 80, 90, maybe a little bit more years on this planet if we're really, really, really lucky. And in this person's case, this example, to completely squander 2 of them when you're miserable for what? To save $30,000 when your money at that point, if you're that close to FI, let's be frank here, right? Just looking at the numbers, you might be 3 years away from FI if you save $0. If you just found a job that paid enough to cover your bills and you saved $0, just the sheer compounding on your net worth would get you there within, if not 3 years, probably 4 years or whatever the numbers essentially amounted to. But to waste those 2 years just seems horrible to me.
Oh, yeah. I was just reading a book the other day. I think this was Tim Ferriss who said, if you have a problem, but you also have money to solve that problem, you actually don't have a problem. And I think that a lot of us, we have these problems in our lives that are easily solved through our financial bandwidth, but we're choosing not to use money in that way. And I think it's a great example of confusing the goal of FI. FI is not a goal, right? Money is a tool. And so if you're confusing the tool with the goal, I think it creates this dynamic of thinking that you can't quit your job that's making you miserable.
Agreed. And yeah, money exactly is that. It is a tool. And just really quickly, I've expounded on what Coast-Fi is, but I'd love to hear your definition of it because I think, like I said, this literally was your life and you were able to exercise that power.
Yeah. So Coast-Fi is when you have enough in your retirement vehicles or investment vehicles that if you don't contribute $1 more, it will grow through the power of compound interest to what you need at traditional retirement age. So I like to look at it as you're front loading your retirement savings, your traditional retirement savings. And when you do that, you have the option to kind of downshift very early in your career. I mean, I was 33 when I realized I was at Coast-Fi status. And so it gives you the almost permission to kind of downshift because your savings for traditional retirement are basically done. And now all you need to do is cover your expenses, which for me are $2,000 a month. And so, my expenses are pretty easily met through now. My only source of income is through podcasting. And so I'm able to fully cover all of my expenses and then some on 8 hours of work a week. I mean, that to me is like, okay, why did I even want to pursue financial independence? It's because I wanted full autonomy over my time. And having this realization that I was already in the financial position to have full autonomy over my time, it almost made the goal of FI irrelevant. I'm still going to reach it because I'm still saving and investing. It's just like an ingrained behavior now. I'm going to reach it eventually, but the timeline has become irrelevant because I'm already living what I would consider all of the benefits of a FI-oriented life. I'm creating what I want to see in the world. I'm spending my time the way I want to. I'm surrounding myself with people that I really admire. And I'm working at a level, 8 hours a week. It's doing something that I love and earning money in a way that aligns with my values, which I've never experienced before. I forget which author said this, that earning money is easy. Earning money aligned with your values is hard. And so I almost feel like exploring that after reaching some of these financial milestones has been incredibly fulfilling for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, I'm incredibly envious of the 8 hours, by the way. That's I think I succumb to, what is it, like Parkinson's law, where the amount of time or the amount of work expands to fill the amount of time you have. And I think this is something, frankly, that I'm trying to work on to be better at. I think I like to talk a good game of how like optimized I am, and I'm trying to find all these things, but I find myself invariably like drawn to the computer, and I'm going to check my email real quick turns into an hour of nothing, essentially. So I think that, just as a total aside, obviously not germane to what we're talking about here necessarily, but I think it's somewhat tied, right? Yeah, just having that ability, that is FI, regardless of whether you have that 25x or not. It's irrelevant. And I did want to just clarify one thing, which is we also are not implying that you only have power when you get to coast FI, right? Like I think I might have implied that, and I want to be entirely clear. That's not what we're talking about at all. I think the power of FI starts accumulating from day one for most people, right? And it's that first day where maybe if you were living paycheck to paycheck or you were in the red and you start saving money, that first time you have $1,000 saved up and a flat tire isn't a true life emergency. You have power in your life that you simply didn't have before. And I think what we both would be arguing here is that that power keeps accruing.
100%.
Right? And it just keeps
And I think along the journey, and I wish I had thought about this stuff more deeply earlier in my journey, because I think for a lot of us, a lot of the FI community is kind of ingrained in the scarcity mindset. And we feel like we need to have a certain amount of money before we're going to give ourselves permission to do the things we really want to do or to live the way we really want to live. And, for me, even making this decision to quit my job, yes, Coast Fi was a comfort. My emergency fund was a comfort. Also, FU or peace out money for the polite among us was a comfort to me. The fact that I had a little bit of income coming in from podcasting helped me make the decision. But the reality is that my sense of security, if it comes from my income or my investments, it's always going to be on shaky ground, right? My sense of security is in my skill set, the relationships that I've built, the experience that I've had in my career. This community, the FI community, is some of the smartest, most talented, most creative people I've ever met, right? The idea that you're just going to retire and never make an income again is kind of ludicrous for most of us. And so, I did a presentation at a Camp FI event just a few weeks ago about moving from scarcity to abundance and recognizing that if you can build a sense of trust in yourself, that's going to be more valuable than your bank account, because you'll know if some medical emergency bankrupts you or something happens with the market, that you have the skills and the knowledge and the financial literacy to build it back up. That is a sense of security that no one can take away from you.
Yeah. Yeah, that shaky ground, right? And I think that's for so many people who are just reliant on their jobs. And like I'd like to say, and this goes back to my formative experience way back in 2001, which dates me more than I would like to admit. But my company, Arthur Andersen, which was the biggest accounting firm, the most reputable accounting firm in the world, essentially disintegrated within 9 months of me starting there because of the Enron scandal way back when. And all of these people who had built their lives and careers, poof, it was gone. And if they were living paycheck to paycheck, regardless of how much money they were earning, they were in dire, dire shape.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much you earn. It's a matter of, okay, what am I doing? Am I living? To me, it's about saving money, obviously. It's about living below your means. And I think clearly the FI community, I think we've tried very, very hard to change the narrative on this, is that the FI community is not about deprivation in any way, shape, or form. But let's be honest and say you have more options when your life doesn't cost that much. So in your case, right? Diana, your life costs $2,000 a month. I'm actually looking at your place here over your shoulder, and you're not living in horrible deprivation by any means, just so everybody's clear here. And you have more options that way,
Right.
especially when, and again, it's not living deprivation. We're not arguing that. But I think that's why when someone first joins the FI community, the easiest low-hanging fruit is to cut out things. I hate to use the word frivolous because I don't believe it that way, but like things that you don't value, that you're just spending on mindlessly. And like you said, what truly matters to you, it's your skills, it's your knowledge, it's your expertise, it's your network, right? I mean, like to cover $2,000 a month, like you could do that with your eyes closed at this point. Like I'm jokingly saying this, but like if your podcasting ever went wrong, like I would hire you for $2,000 a month just to hang out with me and create content because you're brilliant. Like,
Thank
so
you.
to imagine that you could never cover $2,000 a month is so laughably silly.
Right. And I get some criticism of like, well, it's easy for you to make these decisions and be outspoken and take big risks because your expenses are low. But I have kids and I have higher expenses. And so I don't have the ability to make some of the decisions that you have. And first of all, I don't think it's possible to copy anyone else's path. I will never be that person that says, well, I did it and you should too, right? I think each person has a very unique set of circumstances, skills, and preferences that they can leverage in different ways on their path to FI. So while I don't think anyone can copy me, I have recognized that the less materialistic I am, the more idealistic I get to be. And so that to me is something that, a lot of people question this whole like deprivation. You must be, eating rice and beans every night if you live on that little. But really, it's because my mortgage is so small. I mean, my mortgage is $600 a month for a beautiful house in Cincinnati. Highly recommend coming to Cincinnati. I think it's the best city to pursue financial independence. But, I bought a used car for $6,000 cash. It's a 2010 Mazda 3. I made really good optimal decisions on some of my biggest expenses so that I don't have to worry too much about some of the smaller ones. And I feel that I live a very luxurious life, but it's because I'm not comparing myself to the Kardashians, right? I think a lot of us, we really idolize material abundance or we have a desire for it. And I think for me, the mindset shift of being able to appreciate the material abundance that I already have versus constantly desiring more has really curbed my desire for more because I recognize how much is enough. And I think that whole concept is a very kind of deep internal shift that is very personal. And I think it's really hard to almost convey that to someone who's trying to wrap their heads around how to reduce their expenses. I think the best way that I've done it for myself is to surround myself with people who think this way, who have an abundance mindset, who live modestly, who are actually legitimately happy living modestly. Not like, oh, I'm not buying the Tesla. I really want it, but I'm deciding not to get it because I don't want to spend the money because I'm pursuing FI. That to me is a deprivation mindset. To actually not want the Tesla is a concept that I think in our consumerist culture is a really hard one to digest.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that happy living modestly. That's important, right? It's that internal sense because, right, as you're describing this, not buying the Tesla, it sounds akin to like a diet. Like, oh, I'm depriving myself of this for this time period because I'm doing like this is my short-term goal. And I think anytime your mind goes to that short-termism, like I don't think that's ever going to be successful. It might be successful for a short period of time, right? But like almost again with diets, like the vast majority of them, the weight comes back on or whatever because it's not an identity change. And I think that's where like a lot of like actual permanent change, whether it's money or fitness or whatever it may be, it's about like I'm the type of person that ... And in this case, like I'm the type of person that is happy living modestly or happy living based on what I value, not what other people value.
Exactly.
Right. And yeah, you're chock full of these quotes. The less materialistic I am, the more idealistic I can be.
Yeah.
That's just another just beautiful
Well,
way.
and speaking of idealistic, one of the things I love to say about, we're getting into all this stuff about leaving employers. And one of my idealistic things is I believe that your employer is your customer, not your overlord. I see so many people who are sitting on millions of dollars and they still feel beholden to an employer, or they still feel like I'm walking on eggshells around my boss, or I'm afraid to like rock the boat in this way or another way. When you're able to shift into the mindset of like, my employer is my customer. And by the way, the customer isn't always right. And you have plenty of customers or willing customers. I think you're less tolerant of some of these dynamics of a toxic environment we see playing out. So that's, again, another mindset shift that actually helped me to turn down a job offer just about a year ago. Now, this job offer came out of a consulting project that I did. And this company was a brand that I had believed in. It was like my dream job. The salary was $150. It had unlimited PTO. I would be running a team. I'd be reporting directly to the president. Great benefits. Like when I was still fully ingrained in my career, this would have been the pinnacle job that I had been going for. And, they already were very impressed with my work because I had done this consulting project for them. And when I started talking to my would-be boss about, some of my passion projects, I produce the economy conference, I host these podcasts. I had already had like a number of trips scheduled, through the year. I went on 10 trips this last year. And so that was already on the calendar, right? And so I was kind of explaining like what I have already been committed to. And she had this kind of attitude of like, well, obviously you're going to step down from some of that stuff and make this job your priority. And what became clear to me during that conversation, and I kind of pointed out to her the ways that she made me uncomfortable and some of the things that she said. But what became clear is that she wanted to own me and she wouldn't accept anything less. And when I had said to her that I was going to decline the job offer, I said, look, I'm very well connected in this industry. I'd love to help you find someone else. She had told me she was putting together a board. So I said, why not consider me for your board and you get access to all my knowledge and we don't have this issue of me working full time, but you still get all of the benefits like you have had with me consulting. And her response was so incredibly disrespectful that she kind of like berated me for turning down this job. And I'm like, okay, the way she responded to me was like, well, now me helping you find someone else, I can't recommend this job to anyone else if you're going to treat me that way. And the fact that she completely squandered any opportunity for me to be on her board and help her on future consulting projects, because I'm not going to tolerate an employer talking to me that way. And I get to be extremely picky with who I work with. That's the benefit of having met these financial milestones. And, it's funny how I was able to make that decision is that I called my 5 friends, because if I would have talked to my mom or anyone that's in kind of that conventional 9 to 5 till you're 65,
take the job, of course.
They would have said, you're crazy to not take this job. Right. And I called my 5 friends and they said to me, you'd be crazy to take this job because the opportunity cost of working full time is too high when you've already met some big financial milestones. And so, that's kind of another point I wanted to raise on things that I've learned is that your support system and the people you surround yourself with, who you rely on when you're making big decisions, is worth way more than any amount of money. And my entire circle of influence now are people from the FI community because they're so expansive minded that they help me kind of see potential beyond the default path.
Right. Yeah. We are countercultural in the best possible way, right? It's like you just see the world a little bit differently, but that fundamental shift can make all the difference in the world. Like to that would be self-evident to everybody else. Like you said, your normal traditional circles, of course you take that. That's like you said, it's the pinnacle. This is the job. You're making a great salary. Oh, you can put those little side projects aside. Like I'm thinking of all the things that people would say. Whereas, right, my mind, if you had come to me, it would have been the exact same thing. Wait, you mean your beautiful house costs $600 in Cincinnati? Your life costs $2,000. You work 8 hours a week. You're covering all your expenses and then some. You have this amazing conference that you've built from nothing. You have all these trips. Like that is the most self-evident thing in the world. How could you possibly give that up? Like to give that up for something other than something you're just extraordinarily like excited to jump out of bed for every morning. And even then, honestly, Diana, even then, if it were you have to do that Monday to Friday, 8+ hours a day, every day for whatever 48 weeks a year, taking off for a vacation, like I probably still would say no, or I'd think about it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I had to kind of, when I was making that decision, recognize that over the course of my first year of quitting my job, my income had dropped over 100 grand and I saw no change in my lifestyle.
Wow.
None. All it did is inhibit my ability to save more. But I had already, again, reached some big milestones on my path to saving. And so it is a shift. I think making a decision during your accumulation phase to FI is very similar to making the decision of actually pulling the plug and figuring out a drawdown strategy. It's a big shift to go from saving such a large percentage of your income to just covering your expenses, right? Or actually making a shift to not earning any income and now drawing down from that nest egg. These are big pivotal moments that require, I think, a big emotional shift and mindset shift because you've participated in certain saving and investing behaviors for so long, and your focus for so long had been on increasing your income, that to shift from how do I make more money to how do I make enough money, that is a hard shift.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've participated in this culture, whether you did it overtly or not. It's, hey, we're more successful when we make more money.
Mm-hmm.
That's what 99.999% of people think, right? But is that true? But I have to imagine, even still, right? You're someone who has been successful all your life. Like, even still, earning a six-figure income and then that dropping by 100,000. I have to imagine that still was somewhat difficult.
Well, it's an ego hit.
Yeah.
I mean, my goal was to reach six figures before 30, and reaching that, and having an office in the Empire State Building and having all these fancy clients, like that's definitely, it was very, very much inflated my ego, I think. And so reducing my income and kind of walking away from the fancy corporate career, it's certainly humbling, but I would argue that it's good for me. And I think I realized that most people are so focused on material abundance or making more money that they'll never experience the kind of abundance that I have right now, which is time abundance, relationship abundance, energy abundance, being able to just have a leisurely morning of talking to you, Brad. I mean, on a Friday morning when most people are working, I have a level of time and space in my life that I don't think a lot of people get to experience. And so to me, it's a perspective shift. Am I going to focus on the money I could be making right now? Or am I going to focus on the gratitude for the amount of time that I have to explore some of the deeper questions in life that I hadn't been asking when I was only focusing on my bank account?
Yeah. And that time abundance. I mean, it's real easy to make an argument that's much, much, much more important than that extra income, especially when, frankly, like it doesn't and didn't matter to you that much, right? The last 2 years, because you are covering your expenses. You already had a significant net worth that is just humming along in the background. And if you lock in on what that timeline is to FI, if that's all that matters, well, then you're going to feel like a failure. There's so many ways to make yourself feel like a failure.
Oh,
but
yeah.
then when you look at this and say, I have the only thing that actually matters, which is complete control over my time, then, I mean, that's just such a slam dunk, obvious thing. And I think that's what your letter was talking about, what your newsletter was talking about, is like so many of us focus on what are the bad things that can happen, as opposed to focusing on like, what if this is better than I ever thought it could be?
Right, right. And that to me kind of goes back to like moving from scarcity to abundance. Because when I was making this decision, I had my 5 friends going over my spreadsheets with me, doing a lot of fear setting. Like, what if the HVAC and the roof and my dog gets sick? And like, what if it all happens at one time? Right? All the things I'm worried about, what if it all happens at one time and my emergency fund can't handle it and yada, yada, yada. Right? And so then we were like, okay, what would you do if that happened? In the worst case scenario, where would you pull money from? Where would you start looking for a job? Where would you look for, a low interest loan if that's what you needed to do? Like there are a lot of options if things were to go wrong. But I think an equally probable outcome that we don't consider, and maybe if you look back at your history, a more probable outcome is that typically the things that you're worried about don't happen. and things can turn out better than you thought they would. And that's kind of been the case for me. I anticipated that I just needed to meet my expenses. I didn't know where future income was going to come from. I, at the time, was only hosting one daily podcast that has now moved to 2 daily podcasts. And opportunities fell in my lap that I couldn't have possibly anticipated at the time that I was making the decision to quit my job. And that to me has kind of instilled this sense of trust that, it's not just about my bank account. It's about my skills and my talents and my experience and my connections. That is going to open up doors that I can't anticipate at this moment. But the best thing that I can do for myself in order to seize those opportunities is, first of all, to have the time and space in my life to allow those opportunities to present themselves and to have the energy to be actually able to identify them and seize them, but to also trust in myself that I do have something valuable that I can use and leverage to make money however I choose. And I don't have to be beholden to an employer. Now, I know that self-employment and entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, but I think it's not talked about enough. I saw it as like graduating to a different trajectory, because once I decided to pursue self-employment, I almost graduated to this area of like, I already have all the benefits of being FI right now. I don't have to wait until 25 times my yearly expenses. And because I'm self-employed, it's literally my life looks like how I would want it to if I was already FI, because I'm not going to sit around and do nothing. I would still be building my conference. I would still be doing podcasting. And so it's almost like, why not make the shift now? Right? I feel like I cheated the FI path in a way.
Well, it's just another FI path. And I think it's becoming a much more commonly known one. And I think this is important, is that there's no one path to FI.
Yeah.
And, that is what, again, we have tried so hard to get across, is truly personal finance is personal, and financial independence and your path to financial independence is very personal. And the more we get away from this is just one cookie cutter, you have to grin and bear it until you get to 25 times, and then you reach this magical moment. Like, the quicker we can get away from that, the better, frankly, because I think it just misses so much of this nuance of what's actually important in life.
Yeah. And it's almost trading one dogma for another. Right? I mean, we all are so proud of ourselves for not falling, into the default path and 9 to 5 till you're 65. Well, if you're just adopting another dogma of, some content creator is telling you to follow their path to FI, right, you're almost robbing yourself of the joy of charting your own course. And that, I think, is a big part of it, is that it can be highly unique, and your relationship with money is going to change. Your insights around money and the way you look at how to utilize any of your resources, I think, should change over time. That's personal development.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agreed. Diana, this has been amazing. I'm so thankful that you came on and shared your time, your story, your expertise with us. And you did mention a couple times the conference. We talked about economy. I do want to talk about that for a couple minutes, because I guess will this be the 3rd economy conference?
This will be the 3rd. Yes.
Which is wild. That's absolutely wild. So It looks like from the website, which is economyconference.com, March 17th to the 19th of 2023 in Cincinnati, Ohio. No surprise there. So give us a little overview for people who haven't heard you on. So you were previously on episode 150 and episode 306. And we did talk a little bit about economy, but just in passing.
Sure. So economy is essentially a party about money specifically designed for the FIRE movement. And what we do at Economy is we really solve 2 problems that people face on the path to FI. One is that it can be pretty isolating. For me, I truly believe that FI is better with friends. I would not be here where I am having this conversation if it wasn't for my FI friends helping coach me through some of these decisions. And what's the point of retiring early if you have no one to hang out with, right? So I think that surrounding yourself with people that are on this path is incredibly important. And for me, I know there's a lot of online communities. There's a lot of great online communities out there. My personal preference is I want to talk to people. I want to meet people in person. I don't think anything can replace true in-person connection. And when I see the connection that has come out of the last 2 events, people starting businesses together, a number of relationships have come out. Yeah. I mean, we did a speed dating event or a little activity, and like 3 relationships came out of that at the last event. And the great thing about FI people or people pursuing FI is that even if it's long distance, like I know people that are just traveling around together and they're like, they've become nomads to pursue this relationship. It's very interesting.
Wow.
And friendships, my best friend, who I go long distance hiking with every weekend, and we spend a lot of time together. She retired at 32 or 34 or something like that. And I met her at Economy, and so she's the person that I spend like more time with than even my fiance. So it's incredible. And so that's really the first problem that we solve, is that FI is better with friends, and that in-person connection is how we solidify relationships. The second problem that we solve is that typically when you first discover FI is when you're the most enthusiastic, right? You're like reducing your expenses, you're increasing your income, you're coming up with your investment strategy. But 5 to 7 years in, it's like, it kind of gets boring. You're in the boring middle. You're in that accumulation phase, and it turns into a waiting game. And so I think Economy is a great opportunity for people to come and fuel the fire. Now, about 70% of our audience are in the accumulation phase. 20% are already FI and retired, and 10% are just starting out. So if someone's in debt, like I feel like there's so many free resources, like wait until you're at least out of debt to come to Economy. But know that there are people that are on either side of you on their journey that can be there to help encourage you, share their knowledge. Every single time I go to a FI-oriented event, I learn something new. And so I think that this community is incredibly generous, and that 20% of people that are FI and retired and come to Economy for the community and to share their knowledge are a big part of it. So yes, we do have main stage speakers that will talk about the path to FI from a number of different angles. I'm really focused on bringing in content that will surprise you, because my audience is incredibly savvy and financially literate, and they listen to all the Choose FI episodes. And so I challenge myself to bring in stuff that's going to surprise you so that you can learn something new and reinvigorate your fuel for fire. But there's also a lot of knowledge in the room. And so we have a ton of breakout sessions and workshops and social activities designed to get you guys talking to each other, because this community, I'm telling you, is the most intelligent, generous, creative community you'll ever meet. And you can meet them at Economy.
Nice. Oh, I love that. And I have done in real life meetups, both with our Choose FI local groups, at Camp FI, at Chautauqua. And my sincere hope and plan is to go to Economy in 2023. That's my plan. I cannot promise to you or the audience right now, but actually, I just looked up while we were recording that a famous amusement park, Kings Island, is right near you guys.
Yes.
So my daughter is like an amusement park aficionado at this point, a roller coaster. So
Nice.
That might actually help with the possibility of making this happen, which is super cool. But yeah, I've heard nothing but good things about the conference from numerous people. So I know you said, at least the last time you emailed me we emailed about a month ago, like over 40% of the tickets had already been sold, I think, which is probably significantly higher.
Yeah, now it's around 55, 60% of the tickets have been sold, which like this far in advance is very telling that it will sell out. Yeah. And so super grateful for that, for all of the early supporters. And for people listening to Choose FI, like I would love to offer you a discount code. You can use the code Choose FI, all one word, all caps, for 10% off Economy conference tickets. And again, those dates are March 17th through 19th of 2023 in Cincinnati.
That is incredibly generous. Thank you. I did not know you were going to do that, certainly. But right, it's economyconference.com. We'll have a link, obviously, in the show notes, but you can just head to economyconference.com. And yeah, Diana, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.